This is Lightning Power Lunch with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli on Lightning Radio.
Yeah, obviously a lot of emotions, families in town, a lot of friends, obviously on that team and in the city and stuff like that. So didn't get the job done, but, not for moral victories or anything like that. But I think we have to do a little bit better at shooting when we have opportunities. I think that's kind of what kicked us a little bit. But
I think just the kind of the lack of the shooting mentality, and we didn't have a whole lot of zone time, especially in the first two periods. I think we had 7 shots each period, so that's not what we want. We got to be better in that area.
We had 15 even strength shots on goal for the game, and we had the puck way too much to just have that. We're gonna, the boys are working. They're just, it's like the harder they work, not much is getting done. But in the end, we left a lot of plays on the table, and ultimately you do that, the game's in the balance, and that's what happened. We lost the extra point.
Whoa, wait a minute. That's not Dave Mishkin. That's Erik Erlendsson. I love it, from lightninginsider.com. Also part of our Lightning broadcasts. He does the last call for away games with Chief, and from time to time we have him on not only as a guest but to fill in, and we appreciate him, and he's with us. We are taping, by the way. We want to let everybody know that, just because it is early for E at this moment that we are taping, because he's got deadlines, he's writing, and he needs his beauty sleep. But I forced him to get up. And you have no excuse, because your kids are older now. They don't keep you up. What keeps you up now are shows.
Shows and writing deep into the night. And
Yes.
and let me tell you, it didn't help either that there was an lunar eclipse last night. So let's just say I had a pretty good view of it for a little bit. That kind of slowed me down a little bit in my my writing last night.
Well, it's always fun to have you on and do shows with you at Bolts Radio. If people want to get into the conversation for some questions later in the weekend, we'll get to some that trickled in overnight. But I don't know how much we want to dissect the game. We will, but part of this is the journey of an 82-game season, and you're going to have some games where you're not looking your best. And the positive is last night the Lightning did get a point, so we can say that. But it's like you had a team in the Flyers who is really below you in the standings, and we know there's kind of this race for first place in the Atlantic, but also some teams starting to creep up a little bit, chasing behind you. And it's games like this where I know it's probably hard to get up for, in theory, because this is in Toronto, it's the Flyers. But it's a game, man, you like to look on that schedule and say, we should be getting 2 points. And to not get it, and maybe to not play the way they could have, even though Nikita Kucherov wasn't in the lineup, I think was probably disappointing. And we just heard the sound coming in from Coop and the players coming in, that I think he was disappointed with what they were able to put on the ice last night.
No doubt. You looked at this game, though, and it's sandwiched in between a game against Carolina and Boston, right? And I know Boston's not having the year they expected. We just saw them on Saturday. They traded away some valuable players that had been big parts of their lineup for a number of years, but it's still the Bruins, right? And then this was the game sandwiched in between on a road trip, a team that has struggling to score goals. They were heading towards a historical homestand in a bad kind of way, right? No team had ever gone winless in 7 straight home games. They'd lost 5 of the first 5 of the homestand. It had that feeling of, yeah, you're right. They're not going to be able to get up for that game maybe as much as some of the other games. And you could tell the urgency level wasn't where we would have expected it to be for a team that had lost 2 in a row coming in, something that we hadn't seen from this team since January. And, you get that kind of a game last night. It wasn't necessarily a trap game. I didn't have my Admiral Akbar radar up for that game, but it did have the makings of the in-between game between two teams that typically the Lightning do have an urgency level that's a little high. No Kucherov doesn't help, but they did find a way to get a point out of a game in which where they're trailing going into the third period. And, we know that once you get to a shootout, anything can happen, right? It's a shootout. It's a roll of the dice. Didn't get the extra point. And I do wonder how people would feel this morning or this afternoon if they had won that game in the shootout and got the 2 points with the game having played out the same exact way.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the difference between a shootout win and a shootout loss. But they get a point, they move on to Boston, have an opportunity tomorrow to salvage something out of this road trip. You come home with 3, you feel a lot better. If you can beat the Bruins, you'd have to figure with the way that the game went on Saturday between Tampa Bay and Boston that the Lightning will be up a little bit more for it. We'll see if Cooch is able to play, but just a disappointing style of play last night. I think the shots on goal, 15 shots at 5-on-5 play. It's a 14, I think, because the 15th shot was the one in overtime that counts as an even strength shot, but 5-on-5 was just 14 shots on goal. That's just not going to get it done, no matter who's in the lineup. That if you're only going to put 14 pucks towards net, 5-on-5, it could be a long night for you.
Yeah, and I think, we've been around long enough where I don't know if you necessarily panic if a team is limping a little bit towards the playoffs. I think the politically correct answer might be it just depends on the makeup of your team and how they're able to respond, maybe struggling getting into the playoffs, and then all of a sudden they turn on the light switch and they play some really good hockey. I'm not suggesting that's where the Lightning are headed, but I don't want to overreact to a stretch here where they haven't been as crisp, because I do think you have to take into consideration a lot of different factors. A lot of teams are facing the same situation. The Lightning have put themselves in a pretty good spot they have a couple of losses in a row. It's not going to be devastating. I think for me, the bigger question has been, where are the Lightning going to finish in a year that may be a little bit more important than in previous years? And that doesn't mean that if the Lightning end up being the 2 seed and they play the 3rd seed in the Atlantic, they're not going to win and flip that. Certainly whoever they play in the first round is going to be a tough challenge. But I kind of looked at it this year and I said, I think the Atlantic Division, minus Washington over in the Metro, has the toughest teams. And if you can kind of stay away from that 2-3 matchup, I think it probably gives you the better chance to come out of the first round. Understanding wholeheartedly that nothing's guaranteed in sports. I was just kind of looking at it practically. So I think that's where I'm looking at it for the Lightning, an opportunity to munch some points, not necessarily to feel really good heading into the playoffs, because I think that's kind of been disproven to a degree with sometimes the Lightning when they get into the playoffs, that there's been years they've been rolling and there's been years where they haven't, and they've had some success. And you know that. You've covered that as well as anybody. I think for me, it's more about positioning this year. And I usually don't do that. I usually, Lightning finish 8th. They've got a great chance to roll it. I really don't care. This year, I just feel like it's kind of top-heavy in the East, at least in the Atlantic. And if I can stay away from that 2-3 and you were giving options, I'd like to do it. And I felt like last night was disappointing because you felt like it was a missed opportunity to gain a little bit more ground.
For sure. Especially since Florida and Toronto played each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that they actually have 2 more meetings this year, the Panthers and the Leafs.
Yeah.
Look, if the Panthers sweep those games and they won last night, then you're probably not going to catch the Panthers anyway. But you did lose another point to them last night. And let's be clear, too. The Lightning are not in jeopardy of missing the playoffs, right? Like, they get a big lead on Montreal. I think it's a 10-point lead on the Canadiens, somewhere in that range. Who's in the number 9 spot. So this is not a team that, oh my gosh, where's the urgency? They might miss the playoffs. They're not going to miss the playoffs. You're right. This is a year when maybe seeding does matter a little bit more. But if you're talking about if you're finishing 2nd, 3rd, or wild card 1, you're facing the Leafs or the Panthers either way, right? You'd have to drop all the way down. If you can't get to first, you'd have to drop all the way down to wild card 2 to cross over to Washington, and that's just not going to happen.
Right.
So, it's most likely they're going to finish either second or third, and in that case, you'd want to have home ice advantage.
Yeah.
And they did gain a point on the Leafs last night, right? So they're just 2 points behind. These two teams have one more meeting this year. They've lost all three. The Lightning have to Toronto this year. So, like, if you look at it from if they can get to first, of course, and that's where the disappointing one was. But, like, I was kind of thinking about this. I mentioned it to Chief last night as well, that you look at the history of this team under John Cooper since he took over in 2014. They've only missed the playoffs once. That was in 2017. They had a lot of injuries, and they didn't make it, so they had to push hard to the end of that regular season. But if you look at it, there's really been 2 years where they've pushed hard to the end of the regular season. The first one was 2014, when John Cooper's first full year behind the bench. He wanted home ice advantage in round 1. He felt that they needed it against Montreal, and they pushed hard for it, and they got it, and they got swept. The other one was 2019, when they were chasing an NHL record with wins at the time. They pushed hard. They decided, let's chase some history. You have only so many opportunities to get this kind of a history, and they chased it down, and they got swept. So I don't know if this is a conscious thing. I don't think it's a conscious thing. I think it's a little unconscious. I just don't think, the proverbial let's keep whipping it till we get to the finish line here situation. So I just don't know if they're going to browbeat them because of a couple of bad performances coming off an 8-game winning streak. I don't know if they want them to push that hard, because that's hard to do. It's hard to do in the NHL season, especially towards the end of a long season. We know some of the compact schedule that the Lightning have had, in January. You've got another one here this month, right? 29 games in the month, or 15 games in the month of March in 29 days. So do you want them to push hard for first? Yeah, I could get you a better seeding, but I think you'd rather be in a situation where you're a little bit more rested to get there.
Yeah,
there's something to be said for that too. If I think the goal right now, because trying to catch Florida is going to be hard.
Sure.
With the number of games that are left for both teams, and they do have one more meeting together for sure, and it's possible that Florida. Look, we know how it is. A team goes on a 2 or 3 game slide, it opens a door, and so the possibility is there. But I think you have to look for home ice. If you're looking to try and get somewhere, I think it's home ice. But guess what? In 2022, they made it all the way to the Stanley Cup final, never had home ice advantage in either round, in any round. So
good point. I like your idea about the home ice, because that might be a little bit more realistic. And if push comes to shove, what do they always say? If you can have a game 7, you'd like to have it on home ice.
Yep.
And that makes a lot of sense.
And this year, too, with the difference, the home record compared to the road record, right? Like they're an under 500, an under NHL 500 team on the road compared to home. And even having said that, the year that the Lightning set the record for home wins and during the regular season was 2015. They reached the Stanley Cup final. I believe they had a losing record on the road in the postseason.
Yeah.
Or at home, sorry. They had a losing record at home during the postseason. So who knows?
Go figure. I wanted to ask you, because you brought up some good points about the resting players. And Mish and I were talking about this the other day, and he brought it up because it started with, Greg, you weren't a big proponent of the Four Nations tournament. And you and I have had conversations about this. I just not in favor of a tournament in the middle of the season. I'm not going to rehash it. The fear was the injuries. And look, I think one injury from that is too many. And we saw a couple to, some really key players. But he also brought up one that maybe we didn't talk a ton about, and I'm curious how you think this would play out. Because he had mentioned the Gensels, the Hedmans, the Sorellis, and the Hagels. And specifically Sorelli and Hagel, post-tournament, maybe the production hasn't been the same. And that, is there a concern that the players who did participate in a very emotional, and I don't want to call it grueling, but maybe let's call it that. I know you can use another adjective. Is there concern that having that type of setting in the middle of a very long season for guys who play extremely hard, who are hoping to have a long playoff run, is that something to be concerned about? And have you noticed a dip in play from some of those players coming off of that tournament? And is it something we need to keep an eye on?
Well, I think you certainly need to monitor it. There's no doubt. And certainly that's a concern, especially when you saw the injury to Shea Theodore, right? And what happened to him. And obviously the Matthew Tkachuk, got injured, and he's going to be out for the rest of the regular season.
McAvoy, I mean, Boston's not going to be playing, right? But he's...
Yeah, I like, even when the teams have gone to the Olympics, I don't think you've seen these type of injuries. I think the biggest one with Joe Sakic, I think, hurt his hip 1 year, and I think there might have been one other, but nobody broke a wrist, right? Like Theodore did. We assume it's a broken wrist. It is a concern. I think it's the emotional level.
Yes.
To your point, I think it's the emotional level, because at the end of the day, it was only 4 games, so it's not extremely taxing for 4 games. I think the difference is especially that first game between Canada and the U.S. and how spirited and how charged that game was. So I think there's something to be said for that emotional level, and it can drain you.
Yes.
It can drain you emotionally, especially for guys who haven't been in those situations before. And I know, Cirelli's been in big games in the World Juniors and, Memorial Cup and stuff like that, Stanley Cup finals. So he's used to that. Hagel's not. He's not been in those situations before. His really big first taste was last year at the World Championships, and that's not even on the same level.
But it's almost like that jolt came too soon.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, how do you recover from that? And you're not even in the playoffs yet.
Right. Yeah. But I will say, I mean, Hagel scored some big goals here since they've come back, right? Yeah. He's been good. And I think with Cirelli's case, obviously the production hasn't been there. What has he got, 1 point since coming back? He's been stuck on 20 goals for, since pre-Four Nations. And, he's been stuck on tying his career high in points, and he hasn't had that. But I don't know, in his case, we know he's been banged up. I mean, how many practices he missed this year? He's missed a couple of games.
That's what I mean. He plays such a physical game too.
And he's been beat up this year.
Yeah.
And like, he didn't get beat up in that in the Four Nations, but he's been beat up this year. I mean, you think back to the hit he took in Vancouver, a couple of other big heavy hits that he's taken. So you can't convince me he's not still feeling the effects of some of these situations he's had. Look, any player that plays hard at this time of the year, they're not 100%, and it's just the nature of the game. So I don't know if the Four Nations, in particular the Lightning guys. I mean, Gensel was obviously a productive player for Team USA.
He was,
and he's scored a couple of goals since the team has come back. And Hedman, I think Hedman's been fine, but Cirelli's the one we look at, right? So his production has not been there. You need it. He's your second line center. You need some offense out of that line on a consistent basis, and that's a big reason why they had success at certain points early in the season, because Cirelli was producing, right? We were talking about the pace that he was on, and he was going to shatter his career highs in both goals and points, and yet here we are with 14, 15 games left, and he's still sitting on some good numbers, but not the production's tailed off. And so is that due to the Four Nations?
Yeah, it's
the emotional level. The emotional level, I totally think that there's something to that.
And maybe it's unfair. Maybe to me, it's just it's convenient analysis to look at that and say there's this parallel between the two as we see the dip. And maybe it has nothing to do with it. I think my bigger point was you've got this emotional thing happening for 2 weeks.
Yep.
At a time when the regular season, you're kind of going through the motions still, and like to have that emotion pre-playoff in a long season, to your point, I feel like maybe even less so physically, but to your point mentally, it's draining, because you go from having that first spirited bout with the United States, and then the Buffalo Sabres, and you have some of these, and you're like, okay, it's not the same. And so it's almost like fighting yourself more so than the teams you're going against, which can be the biggest challenge. I will ask you this. any concern about the Cirelli line, to your point, is the second line? They're called on to produce offensively, and they have. That's still going to be your shutdown line most likely in the playoffs? I mean, you're asking. I feel like the stakes have been raised on that line to produce even more now offensively. Like, I don't think they're just the line that goes out there, shut them down, and that's okay. I think they've gotten to a point, and it's to their credit, you're counting on them to score. Is there any concern this year a little bit heading into the playoffs, or at least something to be cognizant of? If you want them with those hard matchups, is there a give and take with what they're going to be able to provide offensively? Or is that something, again, I'm looking at and trying to make something up there?
Well, I think with the type of line that they are, because they're a hybrid shutdown line.
Yes.
Part of being a shutdown line can be spending time in the offensive zone and
Correct.
not allowing the other team. So they can be that type of line. And look, we'll see where it finishes. I still think at some point you're going to see Oliver Bjorkstrand put up there with Cirelli and Hagel. We've seen it in practice. Hasn't happened in a game yet. I think that's what they kind of have in mind, because we talked this whole time. They need a middle six guy, and primarily you would like one who could play second line with Cirelli and Hagel, because it's been a revolving door of who's on the right side with those two throughout the year. You know, they've tried just about everybody in that situation, and eventually, yeah, and he's look, he scored last night. Right, that line did score the go-ahead goal in the second period.
I'm wondering that, though, like with Gergensen's. So is Bjorkstrand the type of player that goes on a second line? We know what he can do offensively, but if you're counting on him to also be part of a shutdown line, are you playing to a strength, or are you asking him to do too much? And is that one of the reasons why we've seen Gergensen's on that line? Because of, look, meat and potatoes type of guy. He's comfortable in that setting. He's also a guy, if the other two guys aren't feeling it, going on a forecheck, do your thing,
Absolutely.
get in there, and alleviate some of that burden. So I'm not telling you Gergensen's is a top six forward, far from it. What's a better fit for a shutdown line, if that's what you want the Cirelli line to be? Bjorkstrand, Gergensen's, or somebody else? Or are you giving that responsibility then to the Yanni Gourde line and whoever that is?
Yeah, I mean, look, it could be.
Could
right?
Yanni Gourde be a shutdown line? But that's not going to be with Bjorkstrand on his wing, is it?
No.
See, I think if you move Bjorkstrand to the second line, I almost alleviate the burden of having the Cirelli line be a shutdown line.
But there'll be a matchup line.
They could be a matchup line. So maybe I'm getting too caught up in the weeds. I'm curious. You get Gourde. Let's say it's Gourde centering a line. I mean, is it Nick Paul at that point? And who else?
Well, right now it's Gonsalves.
So would you feel comfortable with?
He's not a shutdown player.
No, but do you think Bjorkstrand is?
More so than.
So you think more so than Gonsalves?
For sure.
So then we've settled it.
I think John Cooper.
John
you're
Cooper.
welcome.
Now look, I know he listens to the show, and I'm sure he has some thoughts. No, I'm joking. I just
send in your questions, John.
We get because in the Lightning's big runs, they've had a line that's gone out there and take on the tough defensive responsibilities. I still think push come to shove, it's going to be the Cirelli line. I just think that's who it's going to be. I simply asked the question. I feel like they've got more responsibility to score this year as well.
Yes.
And I just don't know. I guess we'll find out. What's that production going to look like come playoff time?
Yeah, you're not going to ride that line to little offensive production like you were able to do in 2022.
Correct.
Right? It was Hagel, Cirelli, and Killorn that year together. They were kind of the matchup line.
Yes.
And you got look, they had great numbers in terms of possession and zone time and everything like that, but they couldn't finish. But they still made it to the Stanley Cup final. They did. That's not gonna happen this year.
They did.
You don't have the depth that you did even in 2022. And look, like we can talk about Yanni Gourde as a shutdown center. Is he anymore? right? This is not the same Yanni Gourde that we remember. He's a few years older.
I mean,
He's
that's a
coming
fair
off
point.
the surgery, so can you ask him to be that kind of guy? I think at this point he's more of an energy kind of guy. And look, you saw what Coop has done here in the early going. He's bumped him up with the top line, right? He moved up Gordo with Point and Gensel for a little bit last night as well, because he can be an energy provider, right? He is still that kind of a player. But
So I agree with you. I think what you're telling me makes sense. At the end of it, it's still going to come down to who can defend the best against the other team's best players. Most likely it's going to be McDonough and Chernak, right? If you can get that matchup on the back end.
Yep.
But that line is probably still going to be the Cirelli line. To your point, I think it's a valid one because is Nick Paul a shutdown guy? Are you going to have Nick Paul with whomever going up and down with Yanni Gourde and somebody else?
I don't think they have those type of players to call that. And look, John Cooper was very ahead of this. He said we can't recreate the Gourde, Coleman, Goodrow line.
100%.
Because you can't do it.
No, you can't.
And to me, that's, we romanticize about Yanni Gourde coming back.
Do.
And we love him. We love Yanni Gourde. We love who the player that helped this team win 2 Stanley Cup championships. And there's still a lot of those same elements here.
Yeah.
But you can't ask him to be that kind of a guy again because he doesn't have those two with him.
Good point.
Right? So you don't have the same type of depth that you had when he was here and helping the team win cups. Because one of the strengths of that team that won in 20 and 2021 was John Cooper didn't care who he sent out. Right? He felt comfortable, especially when they were the visiting team. He felt comfortable throwing any line out against any line. He didn't care. Right? And we saw the Gourde line started basically every period in 2020. Yeah. They were the tone setters. They don't have that type of a line right now.
Has Gergensons elevated himself beyond a fourth line now at this point?
Consistently, I don't know.
Because if you were trying to
recreate,
the Gourde line, and let's say you wanted to go that route, I actually mentioned this to Mish. Is Gergensons a little bit more like Goodrow? You're not going to get a ton of offense. Yeah. Goodrow could drop the gloves and fight. I mean, he was tough as nails. But similar player. Yeah, similar player, correct? I mean, from the perspective of you're going to be hard on pucks.
Yeah.
You're going to chip in here and there. You actually might say Gergensons, over the course of his career, has been a little bit better offensively than Goodrow.
He has, for sure.
But Goodrow has been a really key player wherever he's been. I'm just simply saying, is there any thinking that you could recreate a line potentially to be a pain in the butt to play against, and maybe it's not a matchup line, where you've got Gourde and Gergensons, and then you're finding, is it Paul on a third line? Your fourth line now becomes a Glendening, Chafee, and Gonsalves. I feel like through all of this, Gergensons, to a degree, has been elevated a little bit more with what he can do.
Yep.
More so than I thought, where I had him basically pigeonholed as a fourth line player. Maybe not.
Well, and he's a really good forechecker.
He is.
I mean, we saw that last night. That goal was set up because of his forecheck.
No doubt.
Right? He set up that goal they scored in the 15 seconds into the
Correct.
Second period with Cirelli and Hagel. He did the heavy work. He did the heavy lifting down low. Hagel came in, picked up the puck, got it back to Chernak on the net, rebound, bang, it's in the back of the net. So,
what do you make of that? I mean, do you agree, or are you looking at this differently than I am?
I mean, at the very least, you have a player in Gergensons that you can move around.
Yeah. Right?
So if things aren't going, and certainly we've seen John Cooper through the years, if things don't feel like they're working early on, he can move things around. And now you can move Gergensons up and down. Look, and he has been, in his career, a middle six guy, right, in Buffalo, right? He's scored some goals, not a big goal
He's
scorer,
hit 12, he's hit 15, he's hit 10.
He can put some pucks in the net. So he has a little bit of that ability. We haven't seen it this year.
No.
But we've seen the other parts of his game.
Right.
And look, this is the same thing with so many different players that you don't realize really what they bring until you watch them play every night.
Right.
Like, certainly we've seen Gergensons through the years with Buffalo, but you saw him 3-4 times a year. Now you see him every night and you understand the type of game that he has. And he is a guy that can move up and down between a second and a fourth line. And he can be comfortable doing whatever. I did have a good talk with him right before the season resumed after the Four Nations break. And, he said the offense, it weighed on him, but he wasn't letting it affect his game, right? That's a veteran guy understanding. He said if it was earlier in his career, it really would have weighed on him, but not now. So he can move things around. I mean, that's the one thing. There is some versatility now with Gord, especially because you can put him up as a wing. He can play center. He can play top line. He can play third line. So you've at least created some options for John Cooper and the staff to move guys around if you need it to happen. But I don't know if anybody but Cirelli and Hagel are going to be the matchup line. And if you look at it too, because the odds are they're playing either Florida or Toronto in the first round. It's
Right.
The matchups. It's just the way things are kind of falling right now.
Sure.
Well, both those teams have pretty good first and second lines.
Yeah.
So if you're going to talk about matchups when you get to the postseason, do you send Cirelli out against, if it's Toronto, the Matthews line or the Marner line? I mean, pick your poison, so to speak. Right? I think it's the same thing in Florida. Do you send him out against the Barkov line or you send him out against the Bennett line? So it's not, you can't just shut down one line with your shutdown line.
That's fair.
You have to have, you're going to have two lines anyway. And whoever he sends out against, or whoever he sends a Cirelli line out against, the other top line is going to get Braden Point's line. That's just, for the most part, that's going to be the way it is. So, but yeah, this is not a situation where the team was winning cups that you can look at and say, well, this is definitely what this line is doing. This is definitely what this line is doing. I think the way the roster is constructed, you can't do that.
And that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair, and that's probably the best way to put it, is there may be some moving pieces here, and maybe guys have different roles, as things progress, and we have seen John Cooper mix and match a little bit. He definitely has, a couple of more pieces to work with, I think, for sure, offensively, and where those guys fit in. I'm talking about Bjorkstrand and Gord. Where they fit in within the confines of the team is still a work in progress, and they may not find out until heading into the playoffs. I mean, that could be one of those things where it's still mixing and matching. I think Gonçalves has put himself in a pretty good spot to do something. He is producing a bit more, I think, for sure. I don't think you're going to move Glendening out of the lineup because of what he can do with the face-offs. And we just talked about Gergensons, and, I actually think he's had a good year, even though he scored 2 goals.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Yeah.
I mean, he's been fine. He just, I think the scoring sticks out like a sore thumb. I don't know what else to tell you on that one. And Chaffee, I think, surprisingly, has produced at a pretty decent level. I'm not sure many people thought, coming into the year, if you were to give Chaffee 12 to 14 goals at this point in the season, I think you'd probably take it. It's just maybe it is more of a hybrid of shutting down the other team's top line, and maybe that's going to be different lines on different nights.
Well, and the thing is, too, like, you wonder, because they've kept Gord and Bjorkstrand together for the most part, right, during this, since they've both been acquired, and, the familiarity with those two, because they did play on a line together, specifically in the playoffs a couple years ago when the Kraken reached the second round. Players adapt to new surroundings differently. Obviously, it's going to be an easier transition for Gord because he's familiar with so much, different players for the most part in the room, but he's familiar with the coaching staff, the trainers, all this. It's not a new situation for Yanni Gord, but it is for Oliver Bjorkstrand. And all you got to do is go back to 2022 when they acquired both Hagel and Nick Paul. Nick Paul fit in like he'd been here for years. Brandon Hagel didn't really fit in until the next year.
Yeah.
Right? Didn't really find his spot on this team until the next year. So everybody adapts a little bit differently. And John Cooper's even mentioned, the David Savard acquisition on defense. It's a little bit different for defensemen, but, he said that it took Savard 10, 12 games to really feel comfortable with the system and to fit in, and then he took off. And then he was obviously a big part of that team in 2021. So everybody adapts differently. Bjorkstrand, for as many years as he's been around, he's never been traded midseason. The only time he was traded came during the summer. So I just wonder if they're still trying to find out who he is. He's trying to find out who he is on this team before all that settles in. And you still get a month to go to allow all that to happen. And you've got the way the schedule is set up. You've got the one set of back-to-backs next weekend, but everything else is 3-game weeks from here on to the end of the regular season. So that gives you some opportunities to fit in some practice time. And we'll see. They're scheduled to practice in Boston today if they go out on the ice. And there's a balance between rest and practice. But you have a little bit of time still to kind of figure this out and use practice times to get that done to allow him to feel more comfortable with the transition. And I'm not saying he's uncomfortable, but to kind of get him to a comfort level where he can just go out and play, right? It takes a bit. It takes a team half of a season sometimes for the coaches to say, just go out and play, you've got it, right? And he's trying to find his mix and his niche in this team. So there's a lot of moving parts. There's going to continue to be a lot of moving parts. But I think with these two acquisitions in particular, it's given the coaching staff more options in terms of versatility. And we'll see where everything shakes out once we get to game one, no matter who they play.
Makes a lot of sense. I'm curious what our audience thinks at Bolts Radio as the Lightning falling to the Flyers, picking up a point last night but falling in the shootout. I thought Johansson was pretty good. Coming back, that was a positive sign. No Cooch. I don't know if that's, something to keep an eye on, but I think anytime your best player, especially offensively, is out, it certainly can damper things to a degree offensively. And I think that's going to be something to monitor, and we'll see what the coaching staff does. I hope that it doesn't look serious, but, it's one of those things to kind of keep an eye on, because as much as you do want to finish as high as you can, to your point, there is a little bit of this load management that's going to have to take place, maybe even starting now with some of the players who are either banged up, not feeling well. You can't rest everybody, but can you strategically rest a player here and there to give them more rest?
Yeah, you have to consider it. And sometimes rest means playing 18 minutes instead of 22, right? And sometimes the game will dictate and allow that to happen, but you have to consider it. What I found interesting about last night is who are your goal scorers against Flyers? Gergensen's just his second of the year. Gonsalves just his third of the year. And Atkinson is fourth. Atkinson was in the lineup because Kucherov didn't play. Gonsalves was on the power play because Kucherov didn't play. They produced. Mm-hmm. They did what you would hope that they would do in the next man up mentality. So they were able to step in and give some production when they needed it, because obviously they needed all three of those goals last night. But yeah, you have to, kind of look at that. And, I haven't said that Victor Hedman played 28 minutes last night. Yeah. Go figure, right? Right. Yeah, you have to consider it just for the guys who are banged up. And, Kucherov has been under the weather, but he also left practice early before the team left, for this road trip. So it is something to kind of keep an eye on, something to monitor. We know guys are banged up. What was it? One of the practice days last week, he gave all the Four Nation guys the day off, right? I think it was on trade deadline day. The practice didn't have Gensel, Point, Sorelli, Hagel, Hedman, or John Cooper. None of those guys that were the Four Nations were on the ice that day. So it is something to kind of keep an eye on, because if you're not banged up at this time of the year, that means you're not playing much.
Right. Yeah, that's that's fair. And I think that's also, when we talk about players who could come up and potentially give a guy a breather if that's the route they want to go. We had a question. I'm curious what your thoughts on this. Let me find it, because there's a little bit of talk of some guys who are down in Syracuse, if there's any consideration of potentially moving some guys up. Al says, with an eye to the playoffs, do you think that we may see a couple of call-ups at different times, Finley, Brown, Crozier, or Carlisle, to get some reps in it as insurance? What do you make of that?
The first thing you have to keep in mind, you're limited in the number of call-ups you can make, right? There's some different rules now. I haven't dug into them, but it used to be 4 call-ups post-trade deadline that were not emergency call-ups for injury reasons. So you can't just call. This isn't baseball where you can just call a guy up and play and then, see where, just send them back. You're limited on what you can do. So, like they won't call a guy up just because they want to give somebody else a rest. You don't want to burn your call-ups in that situation. And let's throw Connor Geekie in this conversation too, right? Obviously, he was a big part of the team in the early part of the year, has some size, has some skill. He's kind of, putting some offense together down in Syracuse now with a couple of shootout goals, a couple of goals for the crunch. I mean, it's a great idea to see if they are in the mix to be, in the playoffs. I mean, look, Crozier last year, we know what he's capable of doing. Stepped in the postseason and still looked comfortable in that series against the Panthers. I do wonder where he fits in the grand scheme of things. And then you still have to consider the cap. There's not a ton of cap space room. They were always planning on calling Atkinson back up, so, I mean, that's right there. That's one of your call-ups, right? If you're limited on the number of call-ups, and you've already used one of them on Cam Atkinson. So that's just, again, in principle, that's a good idea, but the inner workings of the CBA are not going to allow you just to call a guy up. Let's see how he looks, send somebody else, call somebody else back up. You just can't do that. So, but you would like to see those guys, but it's not a guarantee it's going to happen just because of the rules.
It's a good point by you, and Al, we appreciate that tweet. I know it's always nice to see if any of the younger guys down in Syracuse want to come up and maybe get more of their feet wet. Crozier has always been an interesting cat, hasn't he, Benny? Just because of, I feel like, has there been one player who has been more talked about as a younger player than Isaac Howard, than Crozier? I mean, it really, and maybe that's just because we haven't seen him. And I think that's probably what it is. But I feel like out of all of the prospects we've heard about over the last couple of years, Crozier's right at the top of the list to, hey, this guy not only should be on the team, but can you make a case he should be in your top 6? And I don't think he did anything when he came up to dissuade you from thinking that, which is really interesting, isn't it? You have a guy who probably can be in your top 6. He's not even on your big club. Now, probably speaks to how deep the Lightning's back end really is. But I do think, look, if they get in a pinch, I don't think they have any qualms about putting a guy like that in.
No. And I would be, like, I would have to think that, because you're going to see it now, they're rotating Radish and Perbix on that right side. But we know how comfortable Emil Lilleberg and Max Crozier are, right? They 100%. Last year at the end of the season, that's what the pairing was in the postseason. There's no salary cap in the playoffs. Yeah. So do you have that opportunity to, and there's no restrictions on the call-ups after that either. And look, you don't want to raid Syracuse, if they're trying to make the playoffs too, they're trying to have their own push. But Crozier's a guy I think is in their plans, and we'll see. I mean, Nick Perbix is a free agent at the end of the year. And that might open up an opportunity if they choose not to re-sign him at the end of the season. And here's the other thing, we're talking about the call-ups and everything. I'd say there's a chance you see Isaac Howard this year. It's not guaranteed.
You mean towards the end here of the regular season?
Yes.
Or do you think in the playoffs maybe?
Or both. Well,
or both.
Towards the end of the regular season.
Nice.
Right? Because Michigan State plays this weekend in the Big Ten conference tournament. I think they have Notre Dame this weekend. It's now single elimination. And then, after they get through the conference tournaments, then it's the NCAA tournament. After that, Michigan State's almost definitely going to make it, even if they get upset in the conference tournament. They're probably going to be in the field of 16. So depending on how far Michigan State goes, the Frozen Four, I think, is like 3 weeks away. 3 or 4 weeks away. Once his season is done, I fully expect the Lightning to at least reach out to him and say, hey, we'd like to bring you in, because college players have some leverage. Once they reach and play 4 years of college, they can actually become an unrestricted free agent. The Lightning don't want that to happen, obviously. There's a lot to like about Isaac Howard's game. I had a conversation with, player development about how much Isaac Howard has put on weight this year.
Yeah.
How much better he's committed himself to playing the 200-foot game. A lot of stuff to like about what he has done. He's obviously one of the top scorers in the NCAA this year. Been a big part of Michigan State's success. They've been, ranked number 1 throughout a good portion of the season. So they don't want to lose this player. There's a lot invested in it. And you tell, this is what teams do in these situations because rookie contracts are basically the same for everybody. Bonus structures, base salary, it's all the same. If you could bring him in, say, we're going to bring you in, we want to sign you, we're going to bring you straight to the big club, you're going to work with us, we'll get you into a game, and you'll burn year 1 of your entry-level contract. So you're that much closer to the end of your rookie deal, you're that much closer to the end of your bridge deal years, all that stuff.
You're getting an NHL paycheck.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
for at least a couple weeks.
For a couple weeks. So that's the leverage he has.
Yes. Absolutely.
By saying, I'm not going to sign.
Right.
Here's what I want. Here's what I want to do. I'd like to go to the Lightning.
And it's not atypical for players to leave college after their, second, third year, right? Ross Colton left Vermont after year 2? Year 2 or year 3, and he chose to sign. But then they lost Sammy Walker and Cole Gutman to the 4-year rule, right? Both those guys became unrestricted free agents. They weren't able to get him to sign. Different situations. This is not a first-round draft pick like Howard is. But, I mean, just kind of keep that in your back pocket as we get towards, the end of this month and the beginning of April, depending on how far Michigan State gets into their season. But I fully anticipate that there will be some contact, shortly after Michigan State, their season ends. The good news is that the Frozen Four, I think, is a couple weeks before the end of the regular season for the NHL. So this is not Chris Kreider when, BC won the national championship in Tampa at Amalie Arena. He basically signed his contract within a couple of hours after winning a national championship, and he was on the ice for the Rangers in Ottawa. So it's not that close to things. But, yeah, I mean, you bring up Isaac Howard and just kind of keep in mind there's a good chance, at least just speculation, that you could see him this year.
Has there been another player like him in the history that you've covered this organization that's kind of made that jump right to the NHL after their season
not a prospect.
has ended?
Not somebody in their system, right? Like JT Brown was signed as a free agent out of college, came straight to the NHL. Andre Schuster. They had another player they signed out of Anchorage, Alaska, a number of years ago that were in the same situation. So that's an incentive to get them to sign as the UFA, undrafted players. But it's also incentive to bring in a player. But they've never had a college player that I can think of that has been this highly regarded, certainly a first-round draft pick college player. And Howard went to college as a true freshman. It's not very often that true freshmen go straight to college. I mean, Macklin Celebrini certainly did.
Yeah.
Jack Eichel did. I mean, there are players that have done this, but they haven't had players like this that they've had in their system that you had to think about. Killorn was an exception, but he wasn't a high draft pick.
No.
Right, but he went to Harvard. He played his 4 years and then signed once his 4th year was done. Was a big part of that Norfolk team. Obviously, a big part of the team that won a couple of cups here as well. But they have not had this type of a college player come through their system that they've drafted that have been this highly regarded.
Where I was going to say, because again, you have a really good pulse on the minor leagues as well. Where would you put Howard with some of the prospects they've had over the years in terms of levels, rankings?
Well, he's a late first-round draft pick, so he's not, he doesn't fall into the Hedmans, the Stamkoses.
Yeah, he's not
those guys.
He's not there. And look, we've seen second and third round picks be incredible, right? The Braden Points and the Nikita Kucherovs. I don't know if is this the skill level of those players when they were first brought in. I couldn't tell you. That's why I'm kicking it to you. Like what are we talking about when you say, his upside, his skill set, and where does he fall when it comes to prospects that we've seen over the last handful of years for this organization?
He's near the top.
Yeah.
Right. He's got a flair for the dramatic.
Yeah.
right? We certainly saw it on draft day. He is not a
Got some
shy
confidence, right?
young man at
Yeah.
all. So he's got that part of his game, but he backs it up, right? Like he had the two goals in the gold medal game for Team USA at the World Juniors, right? Included a big one on a breakaway that he converted, I think at the end of the first period or end of the second period. So he's got a lot of that to his game. And they don't have, I mean, Geeky's probably the closest guy they have if
Right.
you want to still consider him a prospect in
Yeah.
terms of high-end potential, top six potential. They don't have a lot of those guys because of
No.
the draft picks they have traded away. And he is the one first-round draft pick they've had in the past, half decade. But he's a very highly regarded prospect. I can tell you that. I do if anybody subscribes to the Hockey News, they have their prospects issue, and I have the opportunity to freelance and write that for them. So, I see where he lands on what the Hockey News thinks in terms of the top prospects in the NHL. And he's a top, I think, top 70 guy for sure among all the other teams. And he's got high-end skill. And that's where, when they talk about his commitment to a 200-foot game, excites you a little bit, because you have to play at both ends of the ice to succeed in the NHL.
They have, we talked about this year more so than any other year over the last handful. They've done a good job of restocking their system, because you mentioned just Geeky and Howard. I mean, Geeky was a high pick.
Yep.
I don't know what his ceiling's going to be, but certainly you've got a nice core there a little bit. If you had, let's just throw Howard, Geeky,
Ethan
and let's
Gauthier.
and let's just put Crozier in there, even though he's had a bunch of games at the NHL level. I mean, those. I don't know if you had that pool 2, 3, 4 years ago, and look, Gonçalves has found his way up here. He's contributing, so they've done a nice job of kind of retooling on the fly, haven't they?
They have, and that's why getting out of this trade deadline without having to part ways, Dylan Duke.
Yeah, another guy.
Right. They didn't have to use any of those prospects to bring in a player. Right. The only player you lost was Mikey Asama. So that's a win in my book. To bring in a Bjorkstrand and a Gord to help your team, and you didn't have to give up your top prospects. Cost you 2 firsts, but you pretty much kind of know what you have with Howard, with Geeky, with Duke, with Gauthier, with Crozier. Max Groshev, all these other players. Groshev was here late in training camp. Gauthier was here late in training camp, because they both performed well. So, yeah, they have done not just retooling the NHL team on the fly with the Nick Pauls, the Brandon Hagels, the Gensels, all these players that they've lost through the years. They've been able to bring some in and still keep the team competitive. And at the same time, you have some guys that you feel can contribute. Jack Finley, right? We saw him make his NHL debut earlier this year, and he's coming off the injuries. Big 6'6", centerman. So there's a lot to like. They're not blue chip grade A prospects if you're ranking them, but they're players who can, that they believe can contribute at the NHL level, in more ways than just an Isaac Howard can.
Makes some sense. And I didn't get a chance to catch up with you on the air about this. Now that you've had a few days here post trade deadline, what did you make of all the madness? And do you think the Lightning are as complete a team as you can be with a cap in place and restrictions, and really comparing them to maybe the previous couple of teams with how their lineup is constructed?
Yeah, again, I think Bjorkstrand fits exactly what they needed, a middle six guy who can produce and give you some offense and is not going to hurt you defensively. I think his biggest impact still might be in the power play. As that right-hand shot over in the left-hand circle, we've seen him over there. They haven't got a ton of opportunities with the power play, but we've seen them move him over there. And if he can be productive there, at least be a threat, that opens up so much for Nikita Kucherov, right? Like what he can do. He needs that right-hand shot over there. They've tried Chaffee, they've tried Atkinson, they've tried Radish, they've tried Point, they've tried different guys over in that spot. None of them are ever going to be Steven Stamkos, but you could really use a righty over there to kind of open things up for Nikita Kucherov, because I know the production has been there. You look at the power play percentage, it's been pretty good, but it's been inconsistent, especially of late. So I think him over there on that that left circle is really going to help the power play if he can shoot the puck. And he hasn't had a lot of opportunities to do it, but I think the threat is there. I think Gord gives you a lot of versatility. You know, you want to move him up and down the lineup. You want him third line, second line, first line. You can do that with him. And he was great in the faceoff circle last night, right? They haven't had, other than Glenn Denny, they don't really have a guy that you can consistently say will win faceoffs, right? I mean, Paul will have a game here and there. Point will have a game here and there where they dominate in the circle. You know, Cirelli will pop in every now and then, but Gordo just gives you that additional opportunity to send somebody out to win a faceoff. So they do have a lot of versatility and a lot more depth. We talked about the depth throughout the course of this season and what they were going to do. So they've addressed that. I was wondering if they were going to do anything defensively, you know, if nothing else, to open up an opportunity to bring up a Max Crozier and have him as a regular, at least around and be an option as a seventh guy, if nothing else. Didn't happen, and that's okay. You know, we'll see. You get a Moser who can move around. We've seen them do that in games where they've, you know, dropped him down to the left side, you know, to play with a Radish, or, you know, on the right side, and, you know, he's versatile in what he can do. So I think under the constraints that Julian had to work with, he did as good of a job as you would anticipate him to be able to do, to bring in guys to help this team, just like he did last year with Dumba and Duclair. Obviously, they didn't get out of the first round with those guys, but they were really more cap constrained last year. He found a way to get guys to help. This year, he did it again. No surprise.
Well, not a surprise, E. We were able to kind of bring it like we do when you and I get together, and we always appreciate it. We miss Mish, but he'll be back in the saddle on Monday. We've got, of course, the game tomorrow. Just quick thoughts. What do you think about tomorrow and what you're hoping for?
Defensive commitment, right?
Yeah.
That's what rode was at the center of that winning streak, was how they were committed to defense. And, you know, sometimes defense isn't just defending, it's puck management, right? To me, that's a big part of being a good team. That's a good defensive team, is making sure the other team doesn't have the puck, and not the giveaways. I mean, the bad habits that were there early in the year have popped up here in the last few, right? The ice is being cut in half. You know, they're not getting pucks out of the zone. I mean, you have to get back to having a smarter game. Like, you know, we've heard John Cooper say a few times, well, the guys are working hard. Sometimes you got to work smarter.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where they're at right now, is to be better with the puck and not cut the ice in half. And then, you know, the third goal that Philadelphia scored last night, we haven't seen that kind of a defensive breakdown in a while, right? Everybody focused on the puck and not keeping an eye on what's kind of going on behind them there a little bit. And I mean, Ryan Poehling had all kinds of time to set up and, you know, and beat Johansson for what was a key goal. It was like it was under a minute left in the second period. All went from 2-2, and now you're trailing going into the third. So just getting back to playing a winning style of hockey. Winning style of hockey doesn't always mean you win, but you give yourself a better chance, and that's what they did during that 8-game winning streak for the most part. That's what I want to see them get back to, and the fact that they're playing the Bruins, and I know it's not Marchand's not there anymore, you know, the changes that they made to their roster, but it's still the Bruins, and it should still have their attention, especially having played them on Saturday a week ago where they outworked you. Can't have that happen again.
Yeah.
Can't have that happen again. Go out, work hard, just be smart with the puck, and then give yourself an opportunity to win the game by playing winning hockey.
We'll have the call tomorrow. E, we will talk to you during the pregame, as we always do. Thank you for filling in. Where can people catch your work?
Yeah, lightninginsider.com is the website. There's two plans. There's a yearly plan. There's a monthly plan. Both of them will cost you less than a cup of coffee a month. So
get it in.
You enjoy the coverage. You enjoy what I do. That's easily the best way to support me.
Absolutely. E, we appreciate you, buddy. Thank you.
Yeah, fun as always, man. Yeah,
it was a blast. I'll go get some sleep, and
I'll try.
We'll get it going.
It is amazing how fast an hour goes, though, isn't it?
It does. I mean, we could do 5. We're not, but we could, and that's how it would go. But thanks to Steve Ersnick for producing. Thanks to everybody for listening. We appreciate it. You've been listening to Power Lunch right here